tonight on Fitfoot U, we're going to have a really interesting session in timing with the Olympics. We've got Chris Collier. He's a guru at Brooks, and we got connected through the executor Rita Yates through the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine. We had a couple conversations offline here to prepare for this, and I learned a lot. And Chris, I think one of the interesting things that you brought up, and I just briefly want to say that you have experience with both running at Michigan State University. I guess you ran there. Did you run track and cross country?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All year.
Yep. And I was a walk-on at IU, and my claim to fame as a walk-on was that I got lost running behind the girls on the golf course at Indiana. And that subsequently, I ended up deciding after freshman year, I better change sports. So crossed over to bike racing. So tell me, did you have, before we get too far into this, did you have one moment that was either the most epic or humorous of your Michigan State career? Was there anything that stands out?
Oh man. Well, I laugh about it now, but it was kind of a bummer in the moment. I ran the steeplechase, and I only fell once running the steeplechase, and it just so happened to be right in front of my coach with 300 meters to go at the NCAA regional, which was my last race ever. And so that was, I ended up on my back staring up at the sky, and that's not really where you want to be when you're running the steeplechase. So it was tough, but it's kind of funny to think about now, and I joke about it with my coach. So
yeah, in retrospect, those doses of humility are great character builders, and we can laugh about them now and share them. And so that's interesting too, because I think, did you know, before I mentioned Tommy Nohilly, that he was a steeplechase guy, one of your competitors? He's an ambassador over there, but
sure.
yeah, he had the misfortune of missing in two Olympiads by about 100th of a second. So anyway, you had framed some really good ideas about running shoes and selecting them, both with what the runner feels and going from a neutral to the other category you mentioned. Maybe you could start with that as just kind of the initial frame of, the Brooks philosophy with running shoes and choosing the right running shoe.
Sure, certainly. So kind of a little tidbit, just like Brooks in the early 2000s is first decided to really just dive in on running footwear and apparel. And so with that, we got to make sure we're providing products for everybody kind of across the board, competitive side, or if we're getting out the door once a week. And then so when it comes down to picking the right footwear for you, we have our different buckets of experiences. And so we have high cushion, then we have these speed categories, and then we have like this energized, really springy and bouncy feel. And then so hopefully each of these buckets, we're going to be able to capture the mindset that the runner really likes when they step out the door. And then within each of these buckets, we're going to make sure we have a neutral platform, right? Like something like the Ghost, and then cross brand like the Pegasus or the Nimbus, and then also something stability specific with the technology like the guide rail, to provide that extra stability for a runner that's having high volume of deviation from the center. And that would be like our Adrenaline, the Kayano, or the old Nike Structure. And so with these different buckets of like mindset experience, within those, we're also making sure we provide the like correct biomechanical platform to keep them running and keep them healthy. So we really want that to be a conversation, especially like this gets, a little bit in the nitty gritty, like when they're on the floor trying to find the right shoe and looking at a wall. Hopefully there are some conversations that the fitter or the medical professional can have with them to point them in the direction of the right shoe while maintaining the proper biomechanic base. That's kind of how we're approaching the whole line of footwear there.
I think that fits right in line with some of the seminal work by Ben O'Nig. He talked a lot, and we talked about this, about muscle tuning vibrations, forces that come through the muscles. And those forces, particularly when the muscle decelerates, are what causes that chronic injury, whether it be shin splints or plantar fasciitis that, we as podiatrists deal with. One of the things that he mentioned was that oftentimes the runner will perceive what feels best, kind of the chord or tune of the vibration or the feel of the shoe. Oftentimes it's kind of like, I call it Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You have kind of an internal honing mechanism of what will select the best shoe. Not always, because sometimes you run it on the running shoe store surface and it feels great for those first 5 strides, but then after it's either too marshmallowy or whatever. But certainly over sequential runs, I think that's a big part of selecting the right shoe.
Sure.
Another thing I wanted to mention, just as a factual thing, is that he found when he was studying surfaces, and you have some research that you're going to share in a minute about cartilage, but when he was looking at surfaces, he found for a company that was looking at a unique track surface that there was no distinguishable surface that he could clearly identify that reduced running injuries. So much of the research that comes out, and I know you were going to reference one on cartilage, we see, for instance, it looked like, and I don't want to steal the thunder, but there was that bit that said running shoes definitely seem to have decreased volume on those volumetrics that they did with MRI studies of the knee in looking at the volume of the knee cartilage. And you could maybe tell some nuances of the studies. It was hard to factor out from what I looked at on the abstract specific features of shoes being able to key in on that decreased cartilage volume because of the fact that it's so multifactorial. We're all individual runners. Maybe you can comment further and tell me any other studies that you guys have kind of looked at.
Sure. Yeah. So if I'm on the same page, I think thinking about that one study where they're trying to see that relationship between the impact of the knee cartilage and the amount of the deviance that they're experiencing while running. And so there is a relationship there in a little bit. And then further, I think trying to understand all of those research seem to like revolve around the orb of finding that habitual motion path. And so when there's a gap between the habitual motion path of kind of day-to-day work, and then when we get to the motion path of a running form, if we can minimize that gap, that's where we sort of saw a correlation between what's happening with injuries and so on like that. So if the previous medial post wasn't necessarily narrowing that gap or maintaining that gap, and was maybe forcing into an incorrect positioning, and with the guide rail system that they were able to develop, that gap was able to decrease and come closer together between that day-to-day motion path, the running motion path, and that's how we created, we have this guide rail with the neutral versus stability options. Yeah, I will certainly say I am not a medical professional. So when we get talking
down no, that's fine. That's fine.
Stuff like that. But, from what I've read, experienced, and talked to the biomechanics team and all of our teams, yeah, this seems to be like we're on a good track for how we're restructuring.
And that's consistent also with some of the research that has come out on how much force is going through the knee, in that previously the medial posts, and whether it be on an orthotic or in a running shoe, it was thought that you're controlling pronation, but then they started looking at the actual ground reactive force going through the medial knee compartment and found that lateral wedging seemed to do better in terms of, specifically when we're talking about wearing in the medial meniscus, for instance, which is a lot. Generally, it's oftentimes more on the inside part of the knee than the outside, that it really wasn't beneficial. So I'm glad that Brooks came up with a new mousetrap to try to solve some of the problems that are chronic with runners. Now we are having the Olympics next week, and you have a couple teams that you partner with, and you actually have an Olympic athlete that you mentioned that made it. Tell us a little about that experience, that meshing with the elite teams from a Brooks vantage, and then also anything that you can share about coming up for this Olympiad and where you guys are in developments with some of your high profile shoes.
Yeah, sure. So certainly we have kind of a few different things going on in the professional realm. We have the Hanson's Brooks team here in Michigan. They train out of Rochester. Then we have the Brooks Beast, which is a team based in Seattle with Coach Danny Mackey. And then we have Angel City Elite, which is a new group that we just started sponsoring. It's a BIPOC group of women that all ran at the Olympic trials this past kind of round in Atlanta. And so, yeah, certainly that part of the industry and the racing side of things has seen a boom, I think, and particularly in footwear. There's a lot of excitement about fast, lightweight, go fast footwear. And our development teams are certainly utilizing those athletes to get the best insights that they can to create the footwear for them, and then for hopefully other runners as well. Specifically, like the Hyperion Elite was kind of born out of this necessity for a go fast marathon shoe. Des Linden won in the Hyperion Elite, the original version. She won Boston back in 2018. Then the Hanson's Brooks team was pretty heavily involved in working with that. There's some athletes there. And a big story is the spikes. We talked about it yesterday, a couple of days ago. The spikes are a big story, and we do have two athletes that made it through to the Olympics. Marta Freitas, I believe I might have pronounced that wrong, but she's a Portuguese athlete. And then Josh Kerr is running for Scotland in the Olympics, and they will be in a different company spike. Just at this time, our development team was working with them, and it just wasn't up to snuff. And we wanted our athletes to be competitive and confident in what was on their feet. So Brooks is allowing them to run in a competitor spike at the Olympic Games. You might see that, but certainly that is on the forefront of what we're trying to do and get in and provide a spike that's going to be really, really competitive. So
yeah, no, I think that's great too, that a company, since so many of the running companies have runners that have been in competition and understand that that's their one moment to try to do the best, and that I think that's a lot of integrity, that you're still developing product. You've obviously had some successful products. I got to run in the Hyperion. I loved it. To me, it dampened forces very well. It had a similar but slightly more up down ride, less of a little less forward ride. To me, a little more, as I say, kind of dampening anything if I had an injury like a knee versus something like that I had been running to here, a little bit lighter feel. But they're both good. And what I like to do as a runner is to run in different shoes at different times, just to have a different experience. I don't like to always go through the same habitual pattern. Just, that's just me. Some people like the consistency, but I like the variability. There have been at least some studies that have shown that variability in running surfaces can decrease some of the overuse injuries. But no, and back to integrity, I think it's funny because we saw Branson run his little space thing, which was cool, that a private company had gotten into the stratosphere of space. But then it was learned that he faked the bicycle ride. I mean, what? Why do that? So when companies do that, you have to wonder. It's nice to see when there's more of an organic feel to really do what's best for the athlete at that particular time and moment.
Sure.
I wanted to talk a little bit about wear. Runners are always interested in, and I can share my own thoughts, but from a Brooks vantage point, we talked about some of the lighter shoes, like this is not, maybe not, might not have quite the life cycle of some of your other shoes, but talk to me a little bit about wear and what you think the optimum
Sure.
wear patterns for some of the newer, lighter shoes, and then some of the traditional ones like the Beast.
Sure, sure, yeah, and certainly, like, too, seeing a patient with certain tendencies in their stride, and that could certainly affect things as well.
Of
But
course.
I think we are telling people when we test them to be about 300 to 500 miles on the traditional side, right? So we're talking, if we can use that word, the Ghost, adrenaline, glycerin, 3 to 500, 6 to 8 months of pretty consistent wear. And then this new material, like in that Hyperion Elite, the two that you have, and then there's two other shoes with that, the Catamount, which is a trail shoe, and the Hyperion Tempo, which is similar to the Elite in some regards. That's a really good material. It's really, really lightweight. And I'm still confident that we can get 300 out of some of those. Maybe the gap increases a little bit on how quickly that goes down, like with the Tempo or the Elite. Maybe we're looking 2 to 5 or 2 to 4 instead of that 300 number. Just because it is a little more lightweight, maybe we can pound it down a little quicker. But I am pretty confident that DNA Flash, the nitrogen infused base, to be pretty sustainable for runners. So that's one of the reasons I really like the Elite too. It tends to last a little longer than some of the other stuff. So
I think that one of the other things that I've learned through both my own personal use and then through wear, and I was going to try to grab an example of one that I have. Here it is. This is my daughter's running shoe. Previously, she's running the Ghost, and she uses this too if she's like just out in the yard sometimes. And I try to encourage my patients not to do that. And the reason is you're just going to get them more wet, and then sometimes the upper will separate. But what surprised me, and I hadn't been looking specifically at her running shoes, because when we go out and run, we just run, and I'm not always like over her shoulder looking at her running shoes. But she started telling me she was having some shin splints and so forth, and I was like, well, it's no wonder, Serena. She's gotten a lot of wear through the midsole here, the forefoot, and when I tell patients, when you start seeing and I don't know if it can come up here, but the little micro ridges here on the outside, when those start to wear down, that's kind of a sign that if you haven't been keeping track of mileage, that it might be time for a new pair of shoes. And one other trick that to be aware of, and you may have thought of this yourself, but I was told by a running shoe guy that leaving your shoes, on these record heat breaker days that we've been having, if you leave them in the car, you can imagine how that's going to bake the EVA if you have them on, your back window, you throw them in the back seat. So that is not a winning strategy for, preserving the life cycle of your shoe.
Yeah, no, that's a really good call. I have some in my car now. I'm gonna go check on them.
At least you're in upstate New York and not down here in the swampland of Washington, D.C.
There you
What
go.
what other kind of general tips or things that you've come across, in the field that you might want to share?
Sure.
Anything that come to mind?
Honestly, if we're talking about fit, and I mentioned our buckets and experience, like I like always tell people to go try it on somewhere and try to like talk to somebody. Either they're coming to see you, like a medical professional, or hopefully not, if they're not too banged up or whatever. But then check out your local retailer, ask some questions, just because getting a feel for it. And sizing can be up and down depending on what shoe you're trying on, and cross brands, etc. So trying it on is really, really hard to beat. And I always tell people to do that. My friends are always like, what shoe should I buy? I'm like, go try it on first. I can't tell you. So that's my recommendation, to try it on. Keep an eye out for what's hurting. I don't know if you can kind of creating that brain space to be able to see if something's bugging you. Is it going to go away? Is it getting worse? And just being like really aware of your body. something to keep in mind as well. So that's typically how I tell people to find their pair of shoes.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things, and you mentioned, you guys are working on a more advanced spike, obviously, with each iteration, some people will like the original Hyperion, some people will like the second version. So there's little nuances there, but is there anything else that you can share on the forefront of things that that Brooks is trying to do? I know you're always very involved with podiatry, and we appreciate that. We're in a year, we're going to have not the whole Podiatry Association, but this Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine is going to be out in Seattle, and I expect that we'll get to see what the latest and greatest is out at the factory when we do go. I think that's in 22.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
One of the biggest innovations just on the product side is we're redoing and kind of retooling DNA Loft, which has been in kind of our softest, most plush shoes. It's a unique compound. Aside from like our Biomogo DNA, it's just an aerated EVA with some rubber. And now we're going to be injecting that with nitrogen. And so that was debuted in a limited release shoe called the Aurora recently. And that will make a breakthrough into inline product coming in February, which is very exciting. It's kind of an awesome blend between that soft, pillowy, but it does hold its structure very well, which is exciting. Because if we are putting those into shoes that people work in every day, or people want to get a ton of life out of, it can't just be wishy-washy, squishy. So I've been really happy personally with how that feels and maintains that structure. So that's one fun innovation that pretty excited to see how it does on the inline product coming.
What does your running week look like? How often are you still running, and
Oh yeah.
do you train for more just fun 10Ks, or how do you approach it, since you're also a guru for Brooks?
Right.
How does that go?
Yeah, it's tough. When I was in college, certainly Brooks would have branded me as what we call a pacer, like a bunch of goals, wants to set PRs, get out and just crush it. And I am very much what we call at Brooks a soul runner now. So I get out the door 2 or 3 times a week, no watch, like clear my head. I don't do Strava really. And I just kind of go and flush it out. But, we're in the car a lot. Me and my coworkers are in the car a lot. And sometimes it's tough to get out the door, but I do what I can to clear the brain a little bit.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I was sharing with you that my introduction, and I'm more than a little bit older than you by at least a couple decades, I think, maybe 3 or 3.5. But I watched and we both hail from upstate New York. You're from there, right? So
Yes.
I was born in Albany, and we had just moved to Delmar, and I remember that color TV had just come out, in a couple of years, or at least we got a color TV, and the '72 Olympics were on, and Frank Shorter won the gold, and I'll never forget. And of course, there was also can't also get the taste out of that tragedy that happened at Munich.
Mhm.
But at least for the running community, that was a huge thing for an American to win gold at the Olympics. And the first thing that I wanted to do after I saw that was to go out and get, that Munich shoe that Adidas had come out. It was the classic blue with the 3 stars. And I look at that shoe now, and it's almost more of a minimalist shoe is what I would characterize.
Mm.
A little bit more than that, but hardly much more. It had the crepe and everything. And boy, shoes have advanced so much, especially me with I have a deficient ACL and some cartilage on my knee. And for me, I really like the idea of these carbon plates in them, because I like the roll a little bit, and I like the feel. It's kind of a fun approach for the shoe. Do you anticipate that you're going to have a couple lines for the more let's say not as high end runner, like kind of like when the the iPhone comes out, then the next one, and they're able to take down the pricing, because all the pricings are consistently high. It's high technology. When does Brooks see that it might be a little bit more approachable for the budget-minded runner? Is
Sure.
that something that's even talked about, or right now you're just trying to get the best product out the door?
Yeah, well, I think it's both, certainly. And I think that those stories combined, when you do consider price point and being able to provide really good products still on a lower price point. Um, we I guess generally, the Hyperion Elite 2 at $250. I can't give too much, but there are certainly plans in the very near future to continue to develop that Hyperion line. And so there might be something fun kind of squeezing in there. It gives good protection, has the DNA flash, so it maintains like a pretty lightweight feel, but maybe we amp up the protection, drop the price point, and fill that niche there. I think one of my favorite shoes is the Launch GTS, which is a pretty lightweight shoe, a mid 8 ounces, and at $100 with a Biomogo DNA midsole, you can get 350 out of it, and it feels pretty good. So hopefully, we can fit all the needs there. But I certainly hear you, and I'm excited to fill out that Hyperion line a little bit.
When you guys run, and I assume that most of it is most of it on treadmills when you have your test athletes to try the shoes, or do you do road test it more than treadmill test it?
They're putting it through all the paces. So, and especially if we're talking like speed product, and if it's track product and a racing flat, certainly trying to use it how they use it. So track, road, and when we do product testing with our wear testers, we mail that out, and they do wear it in the field as well. And that's from all types of runners as well. So, if we're testing a high cushion glycerin, we're making sure we find a tester that fits the mindset for that glycerin. If we're testing a brand new racing flat, we're making sure we're finding a tester that fits the mindset for a racing flat. So putting it through all the work, hopefully.
What, if any, and this is something I don't know off the top of my head, obviously lighter, less weight that you have to carry. Typically, what is the breakdown of ounces between a racing flat and a trainer, roughly? And it's going to vary with shoe size, right? Size 13 foot versus a lady 7, but
Sure.
but typically, what's the
I'm gonna look it up. So the Hyperion Elite, the one that you have there, is actually heavier than the Hyperion Tempo. So the Hyperion Tempo is under 8 ounces on the men's side. And so I believe the Ghost is right around 10.5 ounces or so.
Here's the
And so is the
Hyperion Elite
glycerin.
2.
Yep. And so the Elite 2, I'm pulling up the specs because I want to make sure I get this right. Yep. So the weight on the Elite 2 is 7.6 ounces, and then the Hyperion Tempo is 7.3. So I guess specifically, like, there's not necessarily a ratio that they're trying to follow to keep the weight down. But the Elite 2, its own kind of metrics with that plate and the DNA flash kind of outweigh maybe a weight issue. There might be a shoe that's lighter out there, but with the protection and the propulsion of the carbon fiber plate, that's going to be where you get the oomph into the speed. If that makes sense. I sort of did that in a roundabout way, but yeah, they're trying to think about components to get propulsion rather than just shaving off as much weight as they can. And that was a big deal with the Hyperion Elite 2. I think if we're continuing to think about who's running in it, hopefully maybe someone who's going to run their first marathon, and then also someone who's going to hopefully make the Olympic team in the marathon. So definitely shaped the carbon fiber plate to be stable and to provide that protection. And if you look at the midsole on that, in my opinion, it's much less cut out through the middle part of the shoe than some of the other carbon fiber plated shoes, just to try to maintain that stability and decrease the unnecessary deviation.
Are you talking about on the bottom sole or internally?
Yeah, that bottom there. So you can sort of see there's a little bit of a cutout as we get closer towards the middle of the shoe where the arch is. but it is, if you look at it, it's fairly straight compared to some of the others.
Mhm.
And that's one thing that they did intentionally to be supportive without being a stability shoe, and making sure people can jump into it and go fast. So
Yeah, I really like the upper on all these new shoes. They're very comfortable, very light, and not really getting blisters per se
nice.
on them is nice. So it's a nice, very comfortable, fairly lively shoe, but can see how it really would protect, particularly for a Clydesdale marathon runner. It's got some nice features.
Nice.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't have too much more. I want to just kind of see, is there anything else that you would like to leave people with about, just running in general, the Olympics, or Brooks as a company, since you've been involved with them and have been in the running industry?
Man, oh, there's so much. But no, I would just say, we're really excited to see how this evolution of specifically, um, our different experiences and the guide rails work for people. We're really excited with the guide rail system in our shoes to provide the stability with the medial one, and then specifically that lateral side. And kind of on a really cliche level, I love talking about running and I love talking about shoes, and I feel that Brooks does a really good job of giving good energy to runners, and certainly making good product for them to stay healthy and keep running. I love the Olympics and I love track, and I love watching track. And I hope that uh, this this year would be a great year for the Olympics to get people interested in running. And if they have any questions on running,
Yeah, do you
find
have do
you,
you do you
find
have
me.
contact info that consumers and
Sure.
runners can reach out? Is that something that you can share, or is there a Brooks
Yeah.
page? What would that be? What would that
Sure.
con-
So certainly you can always reach our customer service is on the bottom of brookstrain.com. They're awesome. I worked with them during the COVID shutdown. They will help you out with anything. My email is my first name, Chris, Chris Collier, Collier @brooksrunning.com. Feel free to shoot me an email, or walk into your local running store and just ask some questions. Everyone that I've ever met in the local running store is pretty chill, and they're happy to help you find something that works for you. So, or just answer some questions if you're thinking about it. So, no, I love it. Thanks for opening that up pretty generally.